Hi everyone, this is Jackson Steger, and you're listening to Campfire, a new limited series podcast from Cabin. Campfire is a show that seeks to understand how decentralized organizations achieve wildly ambitious and creative goals. Each week, we are joined by different DAO leaders and operators who share the tips, tricks, and tactics that they have used to build community and ship product. Today, we're joined by Julia Lipton, founder of both Awesome People Ventures and DAO Masters. Awesome People Ventures is a fund focusing on the ways people live and work, while DAO Masters is a tokenized community researching best tools and practices for DAOs. In this episode, we picked Julia's brain on how to onboard the next million DAO contributors and operators. We also discussed the concept of progressive decentralization, a process by which DAO founders and early contributors steadily offload degrees of responsibility over time. Shadman Uddin, an active member of Cabin's Community Guild, joined this episode to pick Julia's brain on how to think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in DAOs. You can learn more about both DAO Masters and Awesome People Ventures through Twitter and through the links in the show notes. Julia, quite the awesome person herself, can be found on Twitter at Julia Lipton. All right, let's get it. All right, it is St. Patrick's Day, and I feel very lucky to have Julia Lipton joining Campfire. Julia, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Want to get the conversation started by just establishing some context around Awesome People Ventures. So what is it, and what do you do with Awesome People Ventures?
Awesome People Ventures started as Web 2 fund, actually, in 2019, and the premise was to help awesome people do awesome things bent towards world positive companies. So a lot in healthcare, wellness, climate, and I'm obsessed with the future of work and the future of solopreneurship and being your own boss and owning your cash flow. So we did a lot of stuff in that space too. So that is how Awesome People started, just help awesome people do awesome things to make the world a better place. I took a break after early 2021 when I finished deploying the fund to pursue what I wanted the future of Awesome People Ventures to look like, and got really interested in decentralizing the fund and sharing upside with the community. And that was before the rise of DAOs, or before they became really popular. Obviously, the DAO had happened way prior. And I started researching the shit out of DAOs because I was like, maybe this can be the solution to my problem, because I want our community to have upside. And if we do well, I want everyone in the community to do well. And that got me into DAOs. I started this big shared Google sheet on DAO research. One thing led to another. I ended up productizing that research by launching a DAO to review DAO tooling. That became DAO Masters. I spent all of 2021 just learning and absorbing and contributing to DAOs and angel investing only in Web3. And then eventually, it was only a matter of time, Awesome People Ventures became a Web3 only fund, and we share upside with our community that help source, diligence, and support our companies, and we'll go on to do many other cool things.
Super appreciate that context, and we're going to dive a little deeper into both of those things. First, just on the Awesome People Ventures side, what are the mechanics that enabled you to make that switch from a traditional Web2 fund to now one that a community can share the upside with?
The good news is AngelList had already, and I'd been working with them over the past year, built this feature called Deal Partners, which enables you to share carry on the back end. And so we'd already been doing that for our Web2 deals. And that has been super helpful. What I need to figure out next is how do I merge that with some of the other mechanics where we're sharing carry beyond just specific deals. So there's still some work to be done. But right now, it really just comes down to tracking value creation attribution, so then we can handle distribution, which is something that I'm more broadly passionate about, where we have a Google spreadsheet of everyone who helps source every deal, diligence every deal, and then we can know. Some of the things have fixed amounts of carry rewards, like 20% of carry for sourcing a deal, and then there's about 50% of the pot that's unaccounted for. So the community can reward people. I don't know at the end of the day if we're going to end up using Coordinate or if there'll be another better tool by the time we actually make distributions. But the assumption is there are a lot of things that people do that add a tremendous amount of value that historically haven't been rewarded because they're quote unquote harder to attribute. And I think it's important that those people that often are just like the most helpful people in your community also get paid.
So you mentioned this Google Sheet, and is there plans to have a token to help facilitate some of this on chain, or is there already a token? How do you think about like
There technically is a token. We do not distribute it yet because of legal and regulatory reasons. The end goal is to get to a token. It will be a non-tradable token, and there won't be a liquid market for it. But the only way that you can earn the token is by contributing. So it'll be more like a worker's token that at the end of the day will make up a % of the total distributions based on how many tokens you own. So for now, we are doing it off-chain for legal and regulatory reasons. But yeah, that's where we're.
I'd love to hear those legal and regulatory reasons. Why is it that a token isn't currently something that you feel comfortable doing with like the SEC or whoever?
It's a very long story, but so one of the downsides of running a fund is you have capital that is not yours. So you have these institutional LPs that have their own LPAs and ways that they work. And some of our larger LPs, which are also crypto funds, strongly advised us to keep everything off chain for now because of the regulatory uncertainty.
Gotcha. I think that one thing that all DAOs are experiencing right now is this regulatory uncertainty. With Cabin, for example, we want to have this ability to crowdfund land and to build new nodes and neighborhoods, but there's been some hesitancy on our side because we don't want to create securities that aren't necessarily legal.
We have the same even just with like basic tokens. Like we're launching a new token similar to Cabin, right? Like basically the generation of DAOs that was formed on Mirror that didn't totally understand what we were getting ourselves into when we did our first crowdfunds. All of us have launched new tokens since. And even in that process, it's so unclear. Like in Cabin's raids is another example. Like you guys didn't even have an LLC for that raise. And it's so unclear.
Given all that ambiguity, what did you think of the Biden administration's announcement on how they're building like a cross-government framework for digital assets?
It seems generally positive, right? But like we're still lacking the specifics and everything's still subject to change. So like here's a good example. For funds, you need people to audit the funds and you need people to give tax advice for funds. A lot of these funds or auditors of funds and tax advisors of funds won't even sign up to do some of the things that are traditionally asked of funds because they don't want to be held accountable because everything's subject to change, which I think is respectable, right? If you're going to try to give a legal opinion and the odds of your legal opinion is going to be out of date, it does put risk on these people. And so I think that's a reflection of where we're at in the market. And I don't know how regulators are going to catch up. All of this stuff changes so fast.
I'm sure, though, that as we get more details, DAO Masters will be one of the organizations that is doing some of that documentation of the research and the findings and the learning. Just want to shift the conversation a little bit to talk about DAO Masters. And you mentioned that you sent out this tweet and it blew up and so many folks contributed to this crowdsourced Google sheet on effective DAO tools and tactics. So can you elaborate a little bit more on how that tweet and your productizing of that tweet led to DAO Masters and now what DAO Masters' mission is a few months later?
Yeah. So starting at the beginning, I had all these questions about DAOs. I really believe in open source and the power of the internet and generally think like everyone on the internet is part of this super dream team. And if we can just leverage everyone's collective powers, we'll be able to do so much more than we ever could do alone. I feel that very acutely. So as I was researching DAOs and DAO tools and DAO resources, I was like, I'm just never going to be able to do that good of a job. At the time, it's so niche. It's like kind of borderline esoteric. I should just tweet this out. And I'm sure there are other people who care about this, but I have no idea who these people are today. And so I sent out this tweet with a link to a Google Sheet and gave the internet right access to the sheet. And at first it had very few engagements. I was like, oh crap, this is a dud. But Twitter is amazing where like your vibe attracts your tribe. It will show the people who care if you get the right people liking an algorithm. And we had hundreds of people contribute DAO tools, DAOs, DAO resources and links, open questions about DAOs. It was pretty amazing. And then that sheet continued to be used for months. And at some point I'd go back to check the sheet and it was totally unusable. There was just so much stuff in it. And so I started thinking, I wonder if there's something like MakerPad where it reviews tools for Web3, or in this scenario, use case for DAOs. And there wasn't. So then I started asking Twitter if anyone would be interested in it, and then specifically the FWB community if anyone there was interested in it. And within FWB, a bunch of people were like, yeah, I would help you do this. It's like, oh, that's cool. So I drafted a Google Doc for a Mirror crowdfund. At the time, I was thinking we would crowdfund 5 ETH because that's how much I thought it would cost to review like 20 tools if I was just to pay my friends to do it. And someone in the DAO was like, I think you should increase this to 15 ETH. And I was like, I don't know if people care about this that much, but I historically way undervalue things and was willing to believe I was wrong.
And it seems as though you undervalued even still at 15 ETH, right?
Yeah. So we launched this mirror crowdfund. Again, at first it looked like it might be a dud. I went to bed. I was in Europe at the time. And I woke up in the morning and we'd surpassed 15 ETH. And in a few days, we made it to 48 ETH, which was just crazy to me how many people cared. And as a last minute idea, because my original intention was just to hire some friends to review all these tools. As a last minute idea, I knew that when you launched in Mirror, they also give you these tokens. So I thought, okay, maybe everyone who can contribute can use their token to enter a token-gated Discord, and then they can follow along as we build. Didn't give it much more thought than that. I wasn't thinking about launching a DAO. I wasn't thinking about really using these tokens for anything until that last minute afterthought to use it for gating access. Once I finally launched the Discord, I was like, hiring my friends to do this isn't the most fair thing to do. I should first see if the people who contributed to the crowdfund want to also work on it. And then we can backfill for whoever we don't have. And sure enough, just from the contributors of the crowdfund, we were able to build version 1 of DAO Masters, which was 20 tool reviews.
So that's awesome. And I'm sure that was really exciting as it was happening. And reflecting back on that initial crowdfund and it being so oversubscribed, what do you think made it so effective? And not just because this specific kind of research was so broadly needed, but what was it about how you announced or structured the crowdfund that you think worked well? And as such, how do you advise other DAOs to think about their own crowdfund strategy or token launch?
The first thing that I would say is there was a long time. Like this was like a long buildup. In retrospect, it's, of course DAO Masters would have been built, but that wasn't true at all. Like I was talking about DAOs, trying to understand DAO tooling, trying to just figure out what the heck was going on. And that was months, like probably 6 months of finding the people who cared. Online, I was already building some form of relationship with those people, and it didn't happen overnight. And then even before I launched the crowdfund, when I was trying to figure out who was interested in it, there was probably a dozen people from FWB that even helped edit the crowdfund post. There were a lot of people who were already invested in the idea before it launched. And so we didn't have a genius marketing launch plan. I wrote up a Twitter thread and posted the mirror. But there were enough people who were already waiting for something like this and excited about something like this way before we launched. And I think that really valuable, not just from how do we reach our goal, but to get feedback, to understand what do people actually care about, and to find these people, because ultimately these are the people that you're collaborating with way beyond just the crowdfund.
So this idea of having this enthusiastic energy dormant and ready to deploy with the crowdfund, I've seen that work well for other communities too, right? Like we had Kraus House on the pod a few episodes ago, and when they launched their token, they raised like $1.5 million minutes. It was insane, and it's because their community was so hyped. So have you seen other DAOs do this really well? How can you build anticipation without it being financially focused? How can you keep it mission oriented and keep enthusiasm there?
I think a lot of it comes down to who's starting it and that person collaborating with a bunch of other folks to just figure out who cares about this thing. Because, for example, in my case, like it wasn't my friends who cared. It was a totally different subset of people on the internet who cared. Like my friends all thought this was really weird and out there and like super niche. Which all those things are true, but it's important to find the people who care. And I think in Kraus House's case, like there's a lot of people who think that's a cool idea, millions of dollars worth of people who think that's a cool idea. But I think it really starts by finding the people who care. And you can do that via Twitter, you can do that via Discord, you can even do that in real life. You can do that with an existing community. But at the end of the day, all of these things are community driven.
So I have a rather technical question, just as context. Really, on this podcast, we try to speak in plain English as much as possible about these concepts because they're all so nascent. And you humbly mentioned that the token piece was almost this afterthought, but you also do have some incredible thought into the tokenomics of the DAO Master token. And I'm curious if you could explain for our audience what it means to have a governance token that is inflationary and why this is sometimes a good idea, and also if there is ever a reason why you shouldn't have an inflationary token.
The first thing I would say is we historically haven't been super thoughtful because it really was an afterthought. So this season are starting to put a lot of thought into it because we need to launch a new token because right now our community doesn't own enough of it or our contributors don't own enough of it. And so for context, when we first launched, we sold 80% of our token supply. Because to me, the original project was going to be a one-off. Like we were going to review 20 tools and then the community could do whatever they wanted and that would be the end of our treasury. But we did the thing we said we were going to do. We didn't leave enough of the token supply for contributors. And when it became really apparent that the people wanted to keep going, we wanted to be able to reward people with ownership and we couldn't because our treasury didn't hold our token. We're now going through the process of being more deliberate with our token. It does have some utility cases right now where we use our token to vote. People who hold DAO Masters can vote on what are the next tools that we review, which is really cool because it means that we also know that we're building the right thing. And it's just like this fun tools race that we can all get excited about. We use it for more traditional governance, like voting on what we should be working on, what the budget for things should be, pretty standard DAO stuff, which I guess is quite different from a traditional company, but is very standard in a lot of DAOs.
Cool. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. In your Discord, you have a no price talk rule. Could you elaborate on what exactly that looks like and why you have that?
Yeah. So I should start by saying I actually have no idea what the price of the DAO Masters token is. Right now, the main reason why people buy the token is you need one token to access the Discord. And increasingly, we're coming up with other ways for people to access if they, in fact, are contributors where people can apply and we can issue them a PO-up if they're going to join one of the teams. But what happened in the early days is people would enter the public channels of the Discord and sometimes they talk about the price. And all the core contributors, we just wanted to build the thing we said we were going to build. We wanted to review these tools, potentially review more tools. Now we do research papers, do research. And it was a huge distraction. And none of the core contributors or even peripheral, like 40 people were paying attention to this. And so pretty early on, it was just like, hey, this isn't a place where we talk about the price of our token. We're all committed to this mission. And if that doesn't sit well with you, feel free to go somewhere else and try to pump someone else's token. Because at the end of the day, for us, it's not about the token. It really is about helping people learn and onboarding more people to DAOs and making them more operationally efficient and helping us collectively figure out how do you run a DAO. And I think it's really healthy because there are a lot of DAO projects where the goal is just to pump the value of whatever, like Nouns DAO. Perfect example, like one of the projects I respect the most. But the whole purpose is to make the price of nouns go up. And yeah, it makes sense to be talking about the price of nouns and what would drive the price and all of that good stuff. But in our case, our whole purpose is to share and distribute knowledge.
So I'm going to combine these sort of last two questions where you talk about staying focused on what you're building, but also this need to revamp your token strategy. What are some other priorities for DAO Masters in this current season?
A big one is just figure out how to build a sustainable DAO. And I think this is something that faces a lot of DAOs. So there are a few different types of DAOs, whether they are product DAOs, community NFT focused DAOs, talent service DAOs, DeFi DAOs, and all of these DAOs are trying to figure out what is the business model. How do you stay alive? And for many DAOs, that means raising venture funding. And then you can just kick the can down the road. But for better or worse, because I am also an investor, I look at something like DAO Masters and don't necessarily think it should be a venture funded project. So then that opens a question of how do you keep this thing alive? And or should it stay alive? Like a lot of public goods projects are designed to accomplish a certain task and then they wind down. This season, we were very focused on trying out the partnership model, which was partnering with other DAOs to help them figure out how to be more operationally efficient, whether that's community management, onboarding, compensation. And we've been running that experiment for a season. And what was really interesting that came out of that is our core contributor base really wants to just help people learn. Like they want to review tools, they want to do research, which makes sense. That's how we originally started. So we're still evaluating whether or not we still think that's a good business model for us, but sustainability of the DAO and how do we continue to be able to pay people is a high priority. And part of the reason why we want to restructure our token is so we have DAO Master tokens to compensate people. But even then, that kind of kicks the can down the road. And we still need to figure out what is the long-term sustainable way to generate on-chain revenue.
I keep wanting to eventually talk about like the actual tactics of research that DAO Masters implements, but then you keep saying all these exciting things, so I keep kicking that question down the road. So I'll come to that in a second. But on this point of sustainability, when you and I met at the cabins last month, you mentioned how you're working to offload some of the day-to-day stuff that you'd been doing with DAO Masters. Is very much your baby, but with many projects like this, DAOs want to have progressive decentralization. Could you explain a little bit about maybe using what you told me, like daily daily updates as an example. How can DAO founders start to implement that process of getting things off their plate and bringing other folks in from the community to own and have that feeling of ownership?
Yeah. So for context for people listening who may not have seen the DAO Masters daily update, is every day since the DAO was started, I think that's probably like over 6 months ago, I would write this daily update. And it was pretty comprehensive. It was a summary of what was going on in every work stream. So people, even outside of the DAO who didn't own the token, could publicly follow along with what was happening. The challenge is this would take me like 1 to 2 hours every single day. And so we'd end our night, my boyfriend would go to bed, and I'd stay up and I'd write the daily update. And I wasn't getting that much sleep. It was like this whole new work stream in my day. And at some point, it started getting extremely stressful and just like exhausting. And there are a few problems with this, not just the fact that it was a lot on me. It also meant that I was the face, and when people thought about DAO Masters, they only thought of me, and there were all these other people doing really good work. And so part of it was the workload, and part of it also was I don't want to be the face of DAO Masters. And actually, I think we're getting to a point where I'm probably not. And maybe in a few seasons, people won't even know that I started it, which would be even more the dream. Because at the end of the day, it's all these people doing awesome work. And so now what we do is we have all these work streams in DAO Masters: research, editorial, marketing, although right now that work stream is a little dead, the tokenomics work stream, the legal work stream, and now the heads of each of those work streams once a week post a daily update. And so they can share what's going on in their team and also get visibility into the broader community.
That's fantastic. Kudos to you on finding a process that works, I think, pretty well in getting something off your plate, but also giving other folks that sense of ownership. On this idea of the work stream, so let's talk about what folks are actually doing on a day-to-day basis for DAO Masters. For each of the things you just mentioned, work streams as it pertains to tokenomics or partnerships or biz dev. If you go to the DAO Masters website, what would someone see as it pertains to case studies? What is like the consistent format that you found to be so effective? And how have you been able to standardize these kinds of case studies despite a range of writers and editors working on these projects?
So right now, the main thing on the website are tool reviews. And in the future, we'll have a lot more than that. But right now, it's tool reviews. And so each tool gets voted on by the community of which tools we want to review. And then there's a writing team, and that team then picks which one of these tools they want to review, and a bunch of people are up for grabs. And then there's a separate editorial team that edits all the tool reviews. And actually, there's another video team that makes videos of all the tools. And people volunteer for which ones they want to do. And then at the end, we use Coordinate to reward people for compensation. And I think it's a little bit of an opt-in. People don't usually sign up for things that they aren't good at. For example, I would never sign up to do a video review unless like I absolutely had to, in which case I would, because if we needed to get done, I'd do it. But that's not my core competency. And so, for example, for the first season, I reviewed Mirror and Syndicate and Guild, I think, or at least was part of the team for those. And that's just because those were tools I was really passionate about. And I think part of the reason why we're able to keep quality high is people are signing up for things they actually care about and where they want to go deep and learn. That being said, the editorial process for season 2 was not as strong as the editorial process for season 1. And that where I look at those tool reviews and I'm like, oh, we should do another pass on these. So it's definitely not perfect. And we're always striving to make it better.
I want to bring on Shadman. So Shadman is a contributor to Cabin DAO who's been listening in for the last 30 minutes. And right now he's leading the building out of our DEI strategy. So Shadman, I'm curious in the context of some of these case studies that Julia and team have learned and implemented, what questions you might have for her as it pertains to DEI.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, Julia, just for giving us your time today. So I think you've really been able to occupy a pretty interesting standpoint, both from being a leader and investor in Web 2 and now onboarding so many new folks through DAO Masters into Web 3. And a lot of the pernicious problems around diversity, equity, and inclusion from Web 2 are only manifesting more in Web 3. And I'm really curious from your vantage point, what are the challenges that are facing DAOs and Web 3, especially at this early level of making sure that we're bringing in folks from different backgrounds, races, gender, educational levels of attainment into Web 3 and making sure that we're building with them as opposed to getting on too late?
Yeah. I think one of the big challenges, if you look at who raised and made money in the last couple bull runs, it is mostly men. And so most of the problems that happen in Web 2 only compounded in Web 3. In Web 2, you saw for the longest time, and still this is true today, I think less than 3% of capital goes to female founders. And that's because less than 10% of venture capitalists are female. People tend to invest and work with people that look like them or are like them. And I think you see the same thing happening in Web3, potentially even more, just because the wealth inequality is huge. And I hope that at least for the next bull run, we can have a lot more women involved, because ultimately I think it takes women in positions of power to bring more women along.
Absolutely. And I think that next bull run is on its way. A lot of people are talking about it, but right now is actually a perfect time to talk to DAO founders and future DAO operators around what are some ways they can prepare to bring in more women, more people from different backgrounds to be able to be a part of that next bull run.
One thing we did in DAO Masters is someone actually flagged it pretty early. I think after season 1, maybe after season 2. And then all of the DMGs, which are the DAO Master guides that kind of curate the Discord and lead most of the teams, we broke down all of the women in our Discord and we basically messaged them to see who would want to get involved. So we very proactively tried to make sure that we had an equal number of project leads. And we originally had 4 DAO Master guides. It was 3 men and me. We very proactively brought on a 5th that was woman. And I think it takes that sort of concerted effort where people are going to go do extra work, reaching out to people who might not otherwise raise their hand. But ultimately, so many of these people are so talented and they maybe haven't been given those opportunities in the past or tapped on the shoulder to say, hey, we believe in you. You can do this.
I love that. And so just to distill that a little bit further, would you say that a good recommendation for DAOs is to focus on who's already in your community, and as opposed to trying to bring more folks in, and instead focus on the people that are there and making sure that you're lifting them up so they can take advantage of their being early?
Yeah, in our case, we had a lot of really great women in our Discord. We also do go out of our way to bring folks in. If any of us meet people out and about, not in DAO Masters, but express interest about DAO Masters, we'll invite them in. That's true of anyone of any gender, but when there is a woman who's really high potential, I hate that phrase. It makes it sound like the only goal is to like achieve certain results, and that's not the meaning of life. But if there's someone we think can add a lot of value, we'll really go out of our way to make sure that we connect them with all the right people in the DAO. And that goes down to, I was on a call with a LP for our fund, and like her daughter was on the call, which I thought was so cool. One, that she's in her own very successful and amazing, but she brought her daughter because she wanted her high school daughter to have exposure to Web3 stuff because it's the future. And down to the level of like afterwards, I emailed the daughter. I think I emailed the daughter before her and was like, hey, join our Discord. What's your ETH address? I'm going to send you a token. When you get in the Discord, DM me. I will connect you with the right people. And she now runs our community calls. I don't know how old she is, 16, 17, but she's awesome.
Can I double click on something there? This idea that you would just send someone a token prior to them doing any work for the DAO, is that something you do often? And what's the sort of the strategy or the thought behind that?
I did it a lot more in the early days, just because I feel awful about the fact gas is so high. I don't know what our token price is. I think it's probably like $5. Like, it's not expensive, but like gas is expensive. And so especially someone in this person's position and I've done this for a couple really cool contributors that I've met online that are in India and I know don't have the same means. Yeah, because sometimes financial reasons are a real barrier to entry, and I don't want that to be true, which is part of the reason why we have this contributor application process with the POAPs. But a lot of people are never going to raise their hand up to contribute, because even filling out a form, if they have imposter syndrome, like they just aren't going to do it.
I know we talked about tactics to use for this, not having a playbook, but I do think that's a great strategy in terms of bringing more folks into a DAO project and making sure they're feeling included. Just for the last question, I know it's a little bit of a question, but I do think it's important still for this community to understand, like, what are the benefits of really prioritizing more inclusion of people from different backgrounds, especially at this stage of Web3.
Diversity of ideas and insights is always good, because different people are going to have a different perspective, and it also is great for your culture. Having a more inclusive culture usually means a better place to work. It also means your talent base is wider. I do this all the time for founders that have all male teams and they're trying to hire their first woman. I have to like get on the call with the woman and be like, this is a great place to work. And if people know there are people like them contributing to your DAO, they will feel way more welcome in your DAO. And so diversity is helpful from like an idea standpoint, from a culture perspective, and ultimately from a recruiting perspective as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Julia. Appreciate you diving in here around diversity, equity, inclusion. And yes, fingers crossed. I know a lot of people are doing some great work bringing new folks into Web3 and making sure that it's not repeating the same mistakes as Web2. And I know you're one of them. So shout out to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. Julia, as we approach close, there has been, I don't know if I'd call it a debate, but almost like a mimetic conversation on Twitter about how some people are just building DAO tools and have never even been in a DAO, and there's rampant building of DAO tools and not enough DAO creation. I would argue that we do need better DAO tools, but also, yes, there's so many different applications for more DAOs to be built. I personally have been losing sleep the last few weeks thinking about some sort of wind DAO or ability to crowdfund wind farms. It's keeping me up. But I'm curious, where do you fall on that conversation on more DAOs versus more DAO tools? Who are the people that should be building DAO tools, and just general observations in that line of questioning?
I obviously started as one of those people who was super excited about DAO tools, maybe more excited than anyone about DAO tools. But I'm just a tooling nerd. And I started on that end of the spectrum. And the deeper and deeper I got into DAOs, I realized so many of the DAOs challenges could not currently be solved by tools. And there are a handful of tools that enable you to do things that wouldn't otherwise be possible, where they really do unlock some new functionality for a DAO. I think the main one's actually Coordinate, where there's this intrinsic contributor vibe, mechanic, whatever you want to call it, that happens, but you couldn't in a traditional startup reward that. And so all of a sudden, just by even having Coordinate, you can incentivize this new behavior, which is how you want some function of the DAO to run, not all of it. But I actually think there's very few DAO tools that unlock some sort of fundamentally new behavior. And I think for DAOs to become really powerful, it's all about what are the unlocks? What can a DAO do that a company couldn't do? And that's where I'm increasingly interested. Whereas there are gazillions of DAO onboarding, DAO credentialing, DAO payments, all these tools, and we need them. But from a founder perspective, they're execution races. There aren't unique insights there, and there aren't unseen inflection points. So it's really just made the best teams win. And then the case is, okay, who's going to win? And I have a pretty extreme bias that it's going to be people who have worked in DAOs. A lot, the first question I always ask anyone pitching a DAO tooling company is, what DAOs do you contribute to? And what do those DAOs think about what you're building? And if they don't contribute to DAOs, they just probably aren't going to win. Maybe they could, and I wish them all the best. But when you're in these DAOs, it's so nuanced. Even the payment flow. Do people feel comfortable requesting money? Do people even know how much they're going to get paid? Does money just need to be sent to their wallet? Okay, if it's just sent to their wallet, how do they know? Because it's an internal transaction on Etherscan, and a lot of people are going to admit these things are so nuanced. And so I think it's really important that you have experience in DAOs to be able to get it right at the product level.
I'm curious, is there a particular sector where you think DAOs have a unique advantage or especially able to help solve or create value for people more broadly, and what sector?
I don't know that I think about it as sector, but I think it's areas where you can either enable a new way of flowing in capital and resources, or a new way of being able to capture talent resources. And a super high level, one of the things I think about is we have all the world's capital, but more importantly, all the world's talent on the internet. And most of these DAOs take place on the internet. So you aren't confined by any of the things that confine traditional businesses. And you aren't confined by your full-time headcount, because these people aren't full-time hires in most cases. And so I think we still haven't seen what happens for teams that are extremely effective at being able to leverage a global talent pool that is more flexible. But I think there is an unlock there if people can figure out how to capture and leverage that value and then reward it such that you can keep the talent engine moving. I think there's that. And then obviously, and this is why you see DeFi DAOs as the primary large DAO case. If you can somehow unlock insanely large pools and new capital, or capital to do things that wasn't otherwise possible. So for example, even in the carbon credits market, a lot of people, myself included, think that the voluntary carbon markets, when they're actually built with high liquidity such that they're useful to the financial system and really useful to corporations, a lot of us believe that will actually be built on chain, because it enables more different types of capital with a different regulatory bent. And so where do I think DAOs can build something better? I think it's like one of those two things is true, like that they're enabling some new use of capital and or new use of talent. And I guess there's also it's like a subset of talent, but like what stuff that can be done by the community where you couldn't necessarily build a company around it because companies traditionally are tied to revenue. But when it can be tied to a perceived value, like community vibes, whatever, like that is a whole nother category of thing that can be built because the community values it. And so it doesn't really matter if their revenue goals are whatever multiple they're expected to be at that company stage.
Really insightful answer. I also think that there's this potential alignment on collective action issues that is really interesting and excited to see evolving ideas in that space.
Yeah.
But Julia, thank you so much for joining the show. We really enjoyed having you. Where could folks find you online to learn more? Twitter's probably the best. It's just at Julia Lipton on Twitter. Thanks so much for coming, and
good to meet you, Julia. Thank you.
Keep collabing with you in the metaverse.
Take care.
Sounds good. Thank you, guys.